relatively stationary source.
There's no way that she would be able to maneuver her body in such a way that blood drops would come down on the side of her legs.
This was an event that happened after Crystal Perry was motionless.
That led to one conclusion. The killer was hurt during the attack, and his blood dripped onto Crystal's body.
Blood is slippery. Blood is consistency of motor oil. Your hand is going to slip down and probably go over the blade, and you're going to get cut.
These passive blood drops were also found in the kitchen.
There was drips of blood in the sink and on the counter, and appeared that he went to the paper towel dispenser and got some paper towels. Because there was no drips coming back towards the body, they were all going towards the sink.
Investigators found a shoe in a local store that matched the bloody shoe impression from the crime scene.
An Oak Harbor model Danny shoe, so they had an idea of what the shoe of the suspect would look like.
At Crystal's autopsy, the medical examiner found evidence of sexual assault and collected biological samples for future comparison. In a search for suspects, police turned to Crystal's ex-husband, Thomas, who lived only 6 miles away.
When I was 3 or 4, and I didn't really have a relationship with my father. He was in town, but I didn't know him very well.
At the time of the homicide, Crystal and Tom were not getting along. They didn't care for one another. It may well have been over child support issues.
Thomas had an alibi for the time of the murder.
He was home with his living girlfriend at the time.
But Thomas's alibi was problematic. His girlfriend, Joanne Stager, had a run-in with Crystal Perry shortly before the murder.
There was no love lost between the two of them. Joanne is jealous of Crystal, and to the point where she had a altercation at a local bar one night.
Crystal was punched in the eye, and she had a big black eye. They were quickly pulled apart by the bar owners.
Joanne is actually charged with assault.
Those charges were ultimately dropped, but Thomas and Joanne's alibis for the time of Crystal's murder were now considered suspect.
Joanne's alibi was Tom. Tom's alibi was Joanne.
Police weren't the only ones who might be responsible.
Somebody was always calling saying Joanne's involved. I'm not saying that she's a girl that could commit murder, but she was a tough girl.
But Crystal Perry's daughter, Sarah, identified another possible suspect. On the night of her mother's murder, Sarah said she thought she recognized the man she heard arguing with her mother. It was her mother's boyfriend, 19-year-old Dennis Butler. Sarah said she'd seen Dennis get angry in the past.
I had seen him go from being irritated to being pretty angry very quickly.
Dennis and Crystal had a volatile relationship. Clearly, there would be some hurdles with her being 30 and Dennis being 19.
Crystal says to a co-worker that there was an incident involving her where Dennis and her got into a fight, and during the fight, it was a verbal fight, and he had showed a knife and made a threat to kill her.
When questioned by police, Dennis denied he was at Crystal's home that night. He said he was at his parents' house.
His folks had no idea whether he was there or not.
Dennis offered to take a polygraph examination to clear his name. Twice he took the test, and he failed both times.
Everything pointed to him. Everything. And, I mean, the more we get into it, the more fingers begin to point at it.
Today, we heard what he thought may have been a gunshot. A tremendously violent scene. We found the victim on the floor.
5 key players.
I couldn't imagine who would do this. They interviewed a whole bunch of us.
The stakes were very high.
The countrywide manhunt, they can be anywhere.
Somebody calls and says, "We have your guy."
5 perspectives. One shocking truth. The Killing Truth. Back-to-back episodes starting Sunday at 9 Eastern on HBO. shell in.
Okay, we're recording now. Would you like to start from the beginning?
After Crystal Perry's murder, her daughter, Sarah, then 12 years old, was forced to move to Texas to live with relatives. It was understandably a difficult time.
When I fell apart, I really did fall apart and, cried a lot and had a lot of fear. I didn't want to be left alone in the house.
Crystal Perry's 19-year-old boyfriend, Dennis Butler, was a possible suspect. Butler failed 2 polygraph tests.
That tells us that being deceptive, he was not telling the truth on some of these answers, which indicated he was either directly involved or he had knowledge of what took place that night.
Butler wore the same size shoe as the footwear impressions at the crime scene. But investigators did not find Oak Harbor brand shoes in his home. When investigators asked Butler for his DNA sample, he agreed, but in return, asked police for a favor in the event they returned to arrest him.
He says, I know everything's going to point to me, and so when it does, just, try to give me a little bit of courtesy here. When you come to get me at my place of work, would you come in the back door? Because they've been really good to me, and I don't want to embarrass the business. I think in my whole 15 years of homicide unit, I don't think I ever had anybody say that to me.
But when Butler's DNA was compared to DNA from the crime scene, to everyone's surprise, there was no match.
I was shocked that it did not come back Dennis's.
They were all in shock. I think they were all probably 99% sure that Dennis was the one.
So shocking that investigators had difficulty believing the results.
Dennis is such a logical suspect, they asked that it be tested again.
The results from the second test were the same.
The DNA came back, and DNA doesn't lie. And it was not Dennis.
The DNA of blood from the crime scene was also compared to Crystal's ex-husband Thomas, his girlfriend Joanne, and several other suspects. But again, there was no match.
After the DNA results came back, I think everything was on the table. Everything was potentially possible again.
The DNA from the crime scene was eventually compared to the DNA profiles in the database of known criminal offenders, and again, there was no match. With that, the case went cold. Over the next 12 years, several suspects were considered, including a serial killer and a local handyman whose romantic advances Crystal had once rejected, but DNA excluded them both.
Eventually, so much time had passed that I accepted that we weren't going to find this person.
Then, incredibly, investigators got a break. The statewide DNA database reported a cold hit. A man named Michael Hutchinson had recently served 6 months in a Maine prison for a weapons offense, and he was required by law to submit a DNA sample for the database. It matched the semen from Crystal Perry's autopsy.
To a mathematical certainty, it was his DNA at the Crystal Perry residence.
Michael Hutchinson lived within about a mile of Crystal Perry at the time of this incident occurred.
Hutchinson was 19 years old at the time of Crystal Perry's murder.
His name never surfaced because there was no relationship between the two of them. They were never seen together.
When questioned, Hutchinson made a startling confession. He admitted he was with Crystal on the night of the attack.
His story is that he was having a secret romance with Crystal.
Hutchinson claimed he and Crystal were in bed when an intruder burst into the house. He confronted the man in the kitchen, but was knocked unconscious.
He then wakes up, sees the man over Crystal, stabbing her, and he runs out the door.
Did police find a possible witness to the crime? Or had they found the killer?
At the Brazil Stainless.
article includes /HBO Max to learn more.
Hey, it's me, Lily from AT&T. I'm back, working from home, and here to help.
Hey Lily, I'm hearing a lot about 5G. Should I be getting excited?
Depends. Are you gonna want faster speed?
I will.
More reliability?
Oh, also yes.
Better response time?
Definitely.
Are you gonna be making sourdough bread?
Oh, is that 5G related?
No, just like, why is everyone making sourdough now? But yes, you're gonna want 5G.
AT&T is building 5G on America's best network. Visit att.com to learn more.
Circular Truth back-to-back episodes starting Sunday at 9 Eastern on HLN. Michael Hutchinson claimed he had an explanation for why his DNA was at the scene of Crystal Perry's murder. He claimed he was in Crystal's home having consensual sex when an intruder broke in. He said he fled the scene during the attack to protect himself, and later was embarrassed to admit it.
He said he was ashamed because he couldn't protect Crystal or Sarah, and he got scared and ran out of the house, and he didn't tell anybody because he was ashamed.
Even Hutchinson's ex-wife, who had filed 2 protection from abuse orders against him, insisted he was no killer.
I don't believe Michael's a murderer. I don't believe he's capable of it, and I support him fully.
But Hutchinson, who worked in his father's construction business, was known to have drug and alcohol problems.
We had former girlfriends saying that, he was a nut, he'd drink and get ugly and get mean.
People that we spoke to just said that he was just real erratic during this time. He didn't know what to expect.
Investigators found numerous problems with Hutchinson's story. First, Crystal's bed looked as if only one person had been sleeping in it. And if Hutchinson had been having an affair with Crystal, why hadn't her daughter ever seen him?
I would have known. I was living in the house. We really lived as a pair. You know, when you live with a single mother, you know what's going on in her life.
The bloody shoe impressions at the crime scene also disputed Hutchinson's story.
It appeared from my analysis that there was only one person there at the crime scene leaving down that outsole design when the blood was wet.
Finally, analysts compared Hutchinson's DNA to the perfectly round blood drops on Crystal's leg. DNA tests proved this was Hutchinson's blood. Michael Hutchinson was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Prosecutors believe Hutchinson may have been high on drugs on the night of the murder. They also suspect Hutchinson and Crystal knew one another casually since it was a small town. Prosecutors believe he knocked on Crystal's door and used a ruse to get inside, saying he had car trouble or asking to use the phone.